This up. Here we go. So, hold on a second. So we're dealing here. This is part two. Last week was part one, where we did a lot of discussion of Western, Eastern philosophy about what time is. This time we're going to go in the other direction and make a lot of sharp assertions, and you can take it for whatever it's worth, about what time is. It's definitely not what you think it is. And there's kind of be two themes we're going to pick up here. One is that we have free will. And if you have free will, then it's possible for you to make choices and to go one way or the other. So here's a film strip, and it shows the film running along, and it splits. You go one way or you go the other. There's free will. And that's the world that we apparently live in. That seems to match what's going on. But we also have a soul, and the soul, the world that we live in with free will that has time in it, time has many branches to it because we're always making these decisions about which way to go. What do you want to do? We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Um, but when all is said and done, we make some choice, and that's what our soul tracks. Our soul has what's called an Akashic thread. So here we see a bunch of these Akashic threads, one for each soul, and we're looking from the past right up to the present, where we're at now, and then we pick and choose among all these different things, and that's a different dimension to time, the time that our soul sees. So out of the box, we see that time has at least two different attributes to it. And this is something that we believe Nikola Tesla picked up on. That's why his picture is sitting here. He picked up on this in probably the 1890s, and it leads to some interesting things. But we also have Carl Jung here, and the picture actually includes Wolfgang Pauli, who's over here, but this thing didn't allow me to display it. But they had a long discussion over 1930 to 1957 with 80 plus letters back and forth on trying to resolve this. And Jung ended up writing a book called Synchronicity, and Jung and Pauli's letters are collected in a book called Atom and Archetype. So we're going to go through that too. So here we go. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to preface this with something I just found. This is off the internet, okay? And this is someone who's very spiritual and writes many different things. So here she's writing about, when you have negative reactions, okay?
Give her name, Bart.
Her name is Fanny, Fanny Bones, Bones. Not your average name. So anyway, so here's what she's writing about. Again, when you have negative reactions, you have something where you go one way or the other and you don't like it. So here's what she says. Every single one of your negative reactions happens because in some way you've decided that reality made a mistake. Something unfolded, an event, a word, a gesture, a turn of circumstances. And your inner voice, whether loudly or quietly, declared, "No, this isn't what should be happening." That declaration is the friction point. It's the moment where your idea of how life should go collides head on with how life is actually going. So think of it like this. Reality is handing you a package. Maybe it's beautifully wrapped. Maybe it's in a crumpled paper bag. Maybe it's covered in duct tape and mystery stains. So you open it and you instantly decide, no, I did not order this. The mind then spins into an argument mode. This isn't fair. This is wrong. This ruins my plan. This means I can't be okay. All of that mental spinning is resistance, and resistance is the root of the negative emotional charge. It doesn't matter whether the situation is a missed bus or a betrayal by a loved one, the inner mechanism is the same. A gap appears between what is and what you think should be, and in that gap is all the friction, all the tension, all the suffering. That's why two people can experience the same event and respond so differently. One accepts, adapts, and moves forward. The other locks into should not and feels stuck, angry, or hopeless. This isn't about pretending everything is good or desirable. It's about seeing that the emotional heat comes from the argument with reality, not from reality itself. A storm doesn't upset you because it's a storm. It upsets you because you had planned a picnic. A harsh comment doesn't have to devastate you, but it does when you believe people should only speak to you with kindness. The should is the lens that colors the entire experience. When you drop the should, you aren't condoning harm or saying you like what happened. You're simply removing the extra layer or suffering that comes from insisting reality be something other than it is at this moment. From there, you can respond more clearly, more powerfully, because you no longer are fighting the fact that the thing has already happened. It's a subtle shift, but it's profound. The event is what it is. The resistance that this shouldn't have happened is optional. And the moment you see that, your power to choose your state of being returns. So I thought that was an interesting phrasing or whatever. We'll come back to this.
I want to just say
Go ahead.
quickly, I think that's exactly what we're going through right now. You know, we didn't think we should have lost our home and should have to move and, relocate to, a whole different part of the state and all of that. But we decided, okay, this is happening. This time it's really happening. And what if we embrace it instead of fighting it? What if we, roll with it? I think it's going to bring a lot of welcome changes that we wouldn't have discovered otherwise
Sure.
because we are embracing
Yeah.
it and trying to meet halfway and discover the highest possible good that can come of it and create that, rather than just fighting. We're still fighting, we still have 3 cases pending, including one in the Supreme Court of the state of Connecticut. It could go from there to the US Supreme Court. But we're not, that's not going to be the center of our lives.
So,
The center of our lives is going to be what's new and what the opportunities are and how we can go forward from there. There's a huge yoga studio in the town that we think we're going to be going to. And it's very central to the town. They have yoga classes on the town green that are free that anybody can drop into and things like that there's just something kind of eerily fitting. Do you feel that way?
yeah.
Things fit. Things are just fitting. And I think it's because we're working with it instead of fighting it.
Yeah.
I think there was a time to fight, and now there's a time to let go and just see what else can come out of the ashes.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't have thought I would be handling it this way at this point. But it feels like time. It didn't feel this way a few years ago, but at this point it does. So
Okay. So now we're going to be talking about time, but we're going to also be talking about space. And so I'm going to have to introduce some discussions of space. And I'm going to start by talking about what in the world is a vector. So a vector is something that has a direction and a magnitude. It's pointed in some direction and it has some length to it, whatever it is. And that's all very interesting. That's what this shows. But let me turn it around on you. Um, Suppose that we go into a grocery store and ask how many different types of each product are there. Well, if you actually go into a grocery store, you'll find out that grocery stores can have like 10, 20, 30,000 products. Okay. and they can have they're from different vendors. They might have 20 types of cereals or more, but it is what it is. But so they're because the cereals are different from the dishwasher soaps, and the apples are different from the cereals, and so forth. We can sit here and create what we call a tuple. We take a parentheses here, like I've done here, and I put in all the different types of soaps, all the different types of cereals, all the different types of apples. I could put in all the different types of meats, all the different types of fishes, and on and on. So every one of these things that we see here is we call this a tuple, and there's for grocery stores, you can see that this goes on and on. There's going to be hundreds of these things, if not thousands, and we end up with something that's what we call an ordered set of numbers. But the ordered set of numbers actually can be turned around and said it actually has some direction in this multidimensional space, and it has a magnitude. So it itself is a vector here. So we're used to vectors where we don't really think of it that way. It turns out this is something that's going to be really useful. So let's plug ahead a little bit now that we've got a vector. And I'm just going to have to go back and remind you what a complex number is. A complex number is a number, let me get this out of the way, of the form A. So we've got A running out here and B running up here. And A is called the real part and B is called the imaginary part. So A and B are both purely real, but the difference is that B is multiplied by I. I is the square root of -1, and that creates, again, this type of vector here. The key thing about this is the following. Suppose I just had something that was real, say it was at A, and now I multiplied A by the square root of -1. So now I would just go up here to A. Well, if I multiplied A by the square root of -1, it rotates A by 90 degrees, okay? And a different example is over here, where I've got these two vectors. I could multiply each of them by the square root of -1, and that'll just rotate this figure around by 90 degrees. So whenever you multiply anything by square root of -1, you end up making it perpendicular or orthogonal to wherever it was before. So how are we going to use this now that we've got these two notions? We've got complex number, we've got vector. So what we need here is something that physicists call space and time. So we're used to, in space, let me go back and get this out of the way again. We've got three spatial dimensions: left, right, up, down, and back and forth. And then we've got time. So time, what we're going to argue, time has to be perpendicular to being left, right, up, down, and back and forth. So we take the three spatial coordinates, x, y, and z. That gives us our spatial dimensions. Time is perpendicular, is orthogonal to this. So the first thing we do is we see time has units of time, of seconds. But x, y, and z all have units of length or meters. So we have to convert time to length. So the way that physicists do it is they multiply time by the speed of light. The speed of light is measured in meters per second. So time becomes the speed of light times time, which is a length. So now that we've got a time as a length, we want to make it perpendicular to these three spatial dimensions. Well, we do our little trick. We multiply time by the square root of -1. So we take c, the speed of light, times time, and multiply it by the square root of -1. And then what we end up with is a single entity which has x, y, z, and now the fourth component is I, C, T. So space and time are linked together. They become a single four-dimensional space that we deal with here. And here's a picture of it. And this is showing the Earth distorting what we think of as space, which is another story. So now, where is this? What does this lead us to do? We're gonna. The key thing here is what Ron Cowen observed, and this is absolutely critical to everything. What he did was he looked at an electron, and he was able to go down into the microcosm and look at the electron, and he was able to stop it from vibrating. This is typically vibrating at hundreds of millions of times per second. And by stopping it, he was able to draw these pictures. So the electron is actually 10 closed strings. These strings are all run around one another. And that when they resonate, they have energy now inside the strings that he saw here. He displayed it this way as it's actually a torus. It has a hole through the middle of the electron. This is looking down on top of it, so you can see there's the hole there. And so it goes. So the key thing about this is he noticed that the electron is covered with little blocks of information all over it, everywhere. And then he noticed when he looked down into the space compartment that the electron was in, that the foam, the compartment that makes up space itself, is covered with these blocks. And in fact, these blocks control all the forces. They have algorithms and they have storage here, so they control the forces, which is how he was able to stop this from vibrating. Other people uh, didn't have this capability. They just saw this thing shimmering, but he realized he had it and he could stop it, so he could draw these pictures. And so this information controls everything's out there. It controls and in fact can shape space and time. That's what's important about the information blocks. It does everything. It's incredibly powerful, and it's probably the single greatest thing I think that Ron observed, which is all obvious in hindsight. We knew it was important, but it takes a while for it to sink in as to how important this really was.
Should introduce Ron.
Ron is uh, Bruce's brother and was a Buddhist monk. He did all these observations under deep meditation. He was incredibly skillful at doing this, and he had many other skills as well. He was able to look out into the macrocosm and at the far reaches of space, and he looked back to the start of our universe, and so forth, all under this deep meditation.
And he was also a physicist.
And he was also a physicist. Anything else, Bruce, we should bring up about Ron?
Well, yeah, he was quite fascinated by all these information blocks. But the other thing that he had was that he had the ability to look into a person's mind and see what happened in their previous life, and
Right.
sometimes more than one lifetime. And he did that with me. He could see what happened in their previous life, and he told me what happened. It was very informative. But
He was able to look into his own life, and he saw he in a previous life had existed as this world-class mathematician, Emmy Noether.
Right. So it's a interesting ability to have that level of awareness.
Right.
But this level of awareness is actually fairly well understood in terms of Buddhism.
Right. Right.
This is the kind of awareness that you unfold when you start to seriously meditate.
Right. Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So now what we have to keep in mind here, what we saw, what we're leading up to, is we saw the splitting occur. We're going to come back to that in time as we make decisions about what's going on. And one interesting type of splitting are called fractals. There's fractals that are mathematical shapes, and they're typically created by a simple process, some sort of rule, and by iterating on this repeatedly, you end up with, which will give you two examples, a snowflake and a triangle in a second. Now there's another type of fractal that's called self-similar. And the property of self-similar is if I zoom in on any piece of the fractal, I've got a piece here and I zoom in, got a piece here, got a piece here. Whenever I zoom in on it, what I'll see is a smaller version of the whole fractal. That is, you think, oh, this is just a piece of it. And you zoom in and you see, this is what you're seeing. And you zoom in on that and you see, this is what I'm seeing. So it's self-similar means it's the same at all scales. And that appears to be what's going on here, as we'll see when we dig into this, is that all of these things, the things that we're dealing with for time are going to be self-similar fractals. Now, let's just go over here for a second and we'll look at this snowflake so you can see how you can make a fractal. So you start with a triangle, okay, typically an equilateral triangle, and then you divide each, it has three sides to it. So you divide each side into three segments, each of the same length. And then you draw a new equilateral triangle that has the middle segment from step one and points outward, and you remove the line segment at the base of the triangle from step two. And if you do this again and again and again, you end up with this picture here, which sure doesn't look like any triangle. It looks like a snowflake. So this is an example of a fractal that you can construct. A different one is a triangle here where we start with this triangle in the middle, okay, which is a solid echo. We divide it into four smaller triangles. So I go here, I go here, and I go here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 smaller equilateral triangles. I take out the middle one, the one that was here, and then I repeat this process with each of the three remaining ones that are here, here, and here. And when I do this, I end up with this picture here, which is a triangle that's made up of smaller and smaller triangles, and each of them has more and more holes in them. We remember we took the thing out in the middle, so eventually there's nothing here but holes. Even though it looks like there's all these triangles here, there's actually nothing here but holes when we get done. So this is a different example, just to show you how complicated simple rules are. So here's what Ron came up with under observations. What in the world is the geometry now of the universe? We're going to make use of all the concepts we just ran through before. And it came up with the universe has 26 real dimensions, or if we view them as real and imaginary parts of 13 complex dimensions, that's a valid decomposition of this. But there's really 24 real spatial dimensions and 2 time dimensions. So the picture here shows 10 time dimensions, 10 matter dimensions. There's 4 here, 3 for space and 1 for time. This is the world that we live in, but we also have 6 more that are compactified dimensions, so a total of 10 here, making up what is called matter. On top of that, we have what's called dark matter, which instead of having 10 strings, closed strings, has only 5 closed strings. And the other thing about dark matter is it has no charge, unlike an electron, for example. So because there's no charge, again, to get this thing to be perpendicular to the space of matter with the 10 dimensions, we multiply everything by the square root of -1, and we end up with these other dimensions that are right next to us. They're perpendicular to us, and this is where our soul would live, or other spirits would live here. And then there's, again, another 6 compactified dimensions. Now, because we've got matter and dark matter here, there's 6 compactified dimensions that coordinate, that connect all of these things together. So everything is in sync. The time that we see here, the clock that's running for matter, is the same clock that's running for dark matter due to this higher realm here. And in these higher realms, there are entities there that are what would be called spirits or etheric entities. The thing that Ron noticed was there are holes that in this compactified dimension. This has 3 holes, and so there's 8 holes here. So 3 of these holes connect to 8 of the holes here. 4 of these holes for dark matter connect to 4 of the holes here. That takes care of 7 out of the 8 holes that we have here. So in these 6 dimensions, 2 of them are connected together in the compactified space. And so if we have a total of 18 compactified dimensions with 8 holes, we have 10 real dimensions. And this is exactly what matches the Sephiroth in the Tree of Life in the Kabbalah.
Do you have the Calabiao?
I don't know if I have a picture of it. But what I was going to do was diverge for a second over here to just show what Western physics has come up with. They come up with a picture where they have elementary particles consist of either things that are called fermions or particles, and they're the things here in the green and the purple. And then there's bosons. They're here. They're red, and there's a funny yellow one here. So these would be bosons would be fields, and fermions would be particles. Now you notice a funny thing here. We have the electron, and it has 2 things associated with it. These other 2 particles. We have an electron neutrino. It has 2 associated with it. That's because there are 3 holes, and the 3 holes resonate. So the electron is here, and because of the other 3 holes, it resonates into 2 other spaces, 2 other states that appear to be particles. But there's really only one particle, which is this electron, and one particle here, which is this electron neutrino. That the same thing is probably true up here for these quarks, but we don't know yet. But that's the power of what Ron saw, was explaining how this whole thing can be simplified. And then the other side to it is these bosons here are actually all due to electromagnetism. They're all electromagnetic fields at different distances, at different time scales, with the one exception of this funny Higgs boson, which was actually experimentally observed in 2012, and that led to a new this Higgs boson controls the scaling of how much each of these things weighs in terms of particles that are here. So what Ron came up with was incredibly powerful for showing he can control everything here through the electromagnetic force. He can control gravity. He can control anything related to electromagnetism, and so he could stop the electron from vibrating and do these sketches. He also was able to stop the dark matter and had sketches of those. So to go into this, we have 26 real dimensions, 24 spatial dimensions, and 2 for time. We're going to concentrate on the 2 for time, but I'm just setting the stage here. Or equivalently, we have 12 complex spatial dimensions and 1 complex time dimension. And we have a subspace for matter, which has 3 real dimensions, 1 time dimension, and 6 compactified dimensions with 3 holes. Dark matter, which is 5 times more numerous in our universe than matter, is right next to us with 3 real dimensions, time dimension, and 6 compactified dimensions with 4 holes. Ron observed that each of the 7 major chakras that each of us has is made up of dark matter, and he has sketches of those in his book. We did not pursue this, but that's that's what's going on. And then there's the final higher realm, which is 6 compactified dimensions with 8 holes. And so this leads to the obvious thing of the many religions talk of a trinity, and that's the Father that resides as a spirit in the higher realm, the Holy Spirit in the compactified realm of dark matter, and the Son or the Spirit of the Son in the realm of matter. This comes out of the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, and the other side to it is the tree of life of the Kabbalah that has 10 Sephiroths that result in 10 real dimensions in all of this stuff. So, since we've got the number 26, we just put in a conjecture here from 1832 until about 2000 to 2005, mathematicians did a systematic study of symmetries. They're called finite simple groups. And they came up with a categorization of there's 18 major categories of symmetries. And they're displayed here in this table that looks like a periodic table of elements from chemistry. But in doing this with these 18, they discovered 26, or 2 times 13 that are shown down here, 26 different categories that have no relationship to the main categories of the 8 up here. And so that raises the question of, is there some relationship between these 26 oddball or sporadic finite simple groups and the 26 dimensions that we have? There probably is. I don't know what it is. So finally, we get back to what we're building up to, which is time. So we're looking at time. It appears to be something that has a real and imaginary part to make sense out of anything that we're going to see here. The real part of time, the time that we live in, the time of matter in that space, has resulted in a interpretation in what's called quantum mechanics, that every time there's a decision, every time there's a transition of any sort, there's a splitting that occurs where the existing system continues as is, or there's a split off as the change occurs. So everything occurs. In other words, the universe that I live in, I'm constantly developing billions and trillions of new timelines per second. One of them will be the one that I choose to live in, and I'll have to follow that through this long chain. But I create this all by myself by free will, by picking some path through this whole thing. And since I'm doing this, if I meet someone else, like I meet Marjorie, she's doing the same thing. So somehow we have to collectively together figure out how to sync up each of our timelines, because my timelines and her timelines are different. We live on different timelines. So by doing this, we can actually, through the control of the information that's all around us, we can sync up so that we see one reality, that everything is on this one timeline. And we'll come back to that idea. The imaginary part of time, that's where the dark matter lives, leads to this Akashic thread. And the Akashic thread is following through our soul and what goes with it, our consciousness, so that we have a thread, an incredible holographic movie of everything that we've experienced, not just in this lifetime, but in all of our past lifetimes, plus the times in between of the different incarnations. So time is really very different than any of these spatial dimensions that we talked about. And we're going to spend some more time talking about that. But it's quite complex, as you can see. Time is very different from space. So here we go. There was a doctoral dissertation in physics done in the middle 1950s at Princeton University that led to this, what's called many worlds interpretation, or many timelines interpretation, that says that we continue to branch and branch and branch. We have all these timelines, and at some point they either merge or they die out. It's not clear what really happens, but this is totally self-consistent with anything that we know about physics and quantum mechanics.
Why don't you just give a little introduction to that picture, if it's that, just that.
The picture here, we're showing time, and it's in the first frame here. Everything is okay, and now we have an event that occurs. We decide we're going to go to the right or we're going to go to the left. So in the world that we live in, we choose to go to the right, but there's another world where we actually didn't go to the right. We went to the left. Here we are over here. So both of these different timelines are going to exist, and they're just shown here as a split in the movie. But if you could imagine this occurring billions or even trillions of times per second, that's what is creating the reality that you live in. And it's completely self-consistent with anything we know about modern physics.
It tells the story of Schrodinger's.
And and it allows you to, the problem is that it's how you interpret its results. Now, one of the interpretations is that this is creating timeline upon timeline. And so they're all existing there, but somehow we pick one particular path of all these timelines, and that's the one that matters. So the other ones don't get stored in our Akashic record, in the thread that we have. That's the key thing. And that leads to, this is our reality. This is the reality we live in. If we meet someone, we have to merge our timeline with their timeline. We met them, and they have a different set of timelines, and so it goes. Most physicists in the West will say, I believe in this, but the issue is it creates free will and it creates many timelines. And this leads to the issue of, then how do you reconcile this with all these different timelines and different people all existing? And the answer is that by your consciousness, you're able to control which of these you go on. That's your free will. And that also controls what goes into the Akashic record. So there is only one thread that you're following here, but even though all these other things are occurring, they don't matter. They just disappear off the Akashic thread. So what evidence do we have that any of this is true? Well, we have these quatrains or prophecies of Michel Nostradamus. He wrote a series of roughly 1,000 quatrains in the 1540s or so, and they provided a variety of predictions. Some of them are very short term, and others went out centuries. So in particular, he cited the advent of Napoleon Bonaparte in France in the 1790s to 1821, who had a huge impact on European history, on world history. He had Adolf Hitler, who was in Germany from the 1920s to 1945, and this led to the Second World War. And then he talked about an Antichrist. The Antichrist arose in the Middle East from the middle 1990s until probably 2010, and led to an even greater war. Now, we haven't seen this Antichrist. So the thing we can conclude is the following. Nostradamus wrote this because he said, here's what I see as a possible future. It's a possible future, but I don't want this to happen. This Antichrist is just terrible. See if you can get rid of him. And that's what we've done. Collectively, we've changed the many worlds interpretation that we saw there, so that collectively enough people have said, we don't want to go on the path leading to the Antichrist, and the Antichrist is probably alive as a person, but never achieved the power and the destruction that Nostradamus saw for him. And that's an interesting outcome out of this, that time itself, the future, can be changed. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is consistent with this many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And so the question is, how can you interpret this physics into this notion of these timelines to be able to account for that? And we believe there's going to be a need for spirituality or consciousness to play a far greater role than it does right now in modern physics, because the changes that occur are done through our collective souls or spirits that do this. And there's nothing in physics that acknowledges that spirits or souls exist. A different example of this is that the CIA allegedly carried out hypnotic regression on a number of people and asked them to go look into past lives that they had lived. And when they did this in the 1960s, there were a significant number of people that recalled that the South had won the U.S. Civil War. Now, if you look at the history of the U.S. Civil War, in 1862, the South was in fact poised to win it. And Great Britain was in Canada with armed forces, and France was in Mexico with armed forces, and they would have both recognized the South, and they would have told the North to give in to the South, declare a truce, and call it a day. That would have been a perfectly plausible outcome if you were there in 1862. But that didn't happen. So apparently what happened after this was that Lee, as the leader of the Southern armies, all of a sudden started to make lots of mistakes. And the high tide was at Gettysburg when he had a charge take place up a hill into incredible entrenched cannons that the North had, and that was it. They were never able in the South to get as far ever again, and so the South lost, and that is a significant change here. But the people that are living out here today, there still are a number of them that remember that the South won, but that didn't happen. So we have this Akashic thread that is with our soul or our spirit, and every thought, every action, every experience of every soul that has ever existed is recorded in this so-called Akashic field, in this thread. So there's examples of people who, when they die, go through a review of their life. What they're looking at is this Akashic thread, that the Akashic thread is being, you go back to the start of it when you incarnated at birth, and you go right up to your death, and you have this holographic, full color, full sound, the history of your life, all of the good, all of the bad, and everything else. Now, the word Akasha itself comes from the Sanskrit word for ether or spirit. So this is an ancient Indian philosophy, which is really the basis and the essence for all things in the material world. There is an Indian philosophy that believes that we're actually all started out as spirits, and gradually over time, to increase our perception of what was going on in the universe, these spirits started to link up to matter. They started to incarnate at different levels into matter. And in that way, they started to have experiences that they never had before, just being purely energetic. And so this subtle energy that controls everything is apparently what is making up this Akashic thread. These are not physical threads, they're actually energetic threads. But it's a nice description. So the Akashic thread covers three things. Everything is interconnected. So every action, every thought, every emotion is woven into this field, and it creates a web of interdependence. This is what Ron Cowen saw. He saw that this information was everywhere, that everything was interconnected, in every which way, and that this led to linkages between everything. The next thing to keep in mind is there's an energetic imprint of whatever the experience is. So whatever you're doing, whatever lesson you learned, you name it, it's all encoded there into some type of energetic imprint. And then this leads to the notion of a past, present, and future. So the Akashic field holds the potential for everything that has existed, going back to the start of this universe, and then for what might exist, including every possible action that this soul could take going forward in time. But as you choose those things, it narrows it down and only keeps the things that you actually do. Now, we touched on briefly Pauli and Jung. So Pauli was an incredible theoretical physicist, and he was seeing things in this area of the microcosm. We touched on this with this double slit experiment, where if you had one slit in a foil of some sort, and you shot electrons through the one slit, they came out the other side, all lined up on the other side of the slit. But if you had two slits that were close to another, then the electrons all of a sudden turned into a wave, and the wave went through both slits and created an interference pattern rather than having two lines, one on each side of the slit. So this is like totally bizarre. And what could possibly explain this? Well, Ron Cowen could explain it with his observation on what information is. Once the electron saw there were two slits there, it would turn into a wave. That was the way the rules are. We don't make up the rules. We're just talking about what the rules actually are. So this was driving Pauli crazy. He ended up having a post at the ETH, the Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule, which is the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And Jung lived nearby. Jung had a practice, a house on Lake Geneva. So what happened was Pauli approached Jung and said, I'm going crazy trying to understand this stuff. Can we talk to one another? And you'll be a sounding board for me, and I'll be a sounding board for you. And we'll try and see really what's going on here. Maybe there's a theory here. So there's a series of letters coming through in this book called Adam and Archetype that were over 1930 to 1957, over 80 letters, which is really how Pauli interacted. He liked to write these long critiques when someone sent him a paper on theoretical physics. But one of the things that came out of this was Pauli was a great theoretical physicist. He received the Nobel Prize in Physics for when he predicted that when a neutron decays, it'll decay into three pieces: an electron, a proton, and a small little neutral particle. And such it was very small but neutral, he called it a neutrino. It's a neutrino is a little small neutron, no charge to it. And this, in fact, was measured, and it was discovered that every second, each one of us has on the order of 100 billion neutrinos going through our body. So these things are everywhere. We're not sure what they're doing, but that's what Pauli got the Nobel Prize for. And because of his incredible powers as a theoretician, many experimental physicists asked Pauli to visit their labs. They would typically have experiments dealing with some leading edge theory in physics, and Pauli would be knowledgeable on this and could suggest things they might do, is what they were hoping. But whenever Pauli visited, the experiment would fail. catastrophically. A lot of times the equipment would just collapse on itself and just crumble. And this was known as the Pauli effect. That Pauli, by his own presence, physical proximity to the lab, could destroy experiments, which is really bizarre. So the most famous example of this was that in Göttingen, which was a major university
That's the song.
in Germany, it's where Gauss and Hilbert were on the mathematics faculty, and there are many great physicists there and so forth. In Göttingen, there was a physicist that had a lab, and all of a sudden his experiment failed, just like if Pauli had walked in. But the experimentalist knew that Pauli was in Zurich, so he couldn't have caused this to happen. Yet he was shocked when a few days later he got a postcard from Pauli stating that he took a train from Zurich to Copenhagen. And he was actually, the train stopped in Göttingen exactly when the experiment in the lab failed. So Pauli's proximity to the train station was close enough to destroy the experiment. So what this suggests, if you believe this, is that Pauli had a very strong connection with this collective unconscious that Ron Cowen saw, this information that's everywhere that controls all the forces in the universe. And that unconsciously, with this connection that he had and his aversion, he hated experiments. Pauli was, if you could imagine Pauli doing an experiment, it was even worse than having these really skilled people. So whenever he did anything, it failed. But his affinity for making these things fail, he would go in and all the forces that were involved that he could control would make the experiment fail. Here was a mechanism by which these experiments would fail, if you believe what Ron Cowen saw, that this information controls everything. So as a result of all this, and many, many face-to-face meetings, Jung wrote a book called Synchronicity. Here's the cover of the book, about a new notion of time, which Jung called acausal. Now, the question here is, was this really the case? Because a lot of the stuff we've talked about so far in time are things that were discovered after, well, Pauli died in 1958. Okay, so the idea of this many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics had just come out then. And Jung wasn't familiar with it. So ideas like this continually occur in physics. And the question here is, does synchronicity really explain why the physics experiments in these labs failed? The only thing they know is when Pauli got physically close to the experiment, then the lab experiment would fail physically, and so forth. But is this really the essence of synchronicity, or is it simply that the information that's everywhere, that the collective unconscious that links everything, controls these forces? Pauli's able to tap into it unconsciously, and whenever he does and he finds an experiment, he causes it to fail. Who knows? There's no way to answer this today, but this is a hypothesis about what really happened here. Now, the most famous thing that we've got for time to date, there'll be others, is what's called the Philadelphia experiment. In the early 1930s, Nikola Tesla did some theoretical analysis, and he also was a very good experimentalist. So he did some initial experiments that suggested it was possible to use electromagnetism to create a cloak of invisibility. Now, this is very important, for example, for the US Navy, because their ships, by being invisible, couldn't be sunk at sea. They were losing lots of ships in World War II to the Germans' U-boats. And having a mechanism for cloaking the ships looked to be a great idea. Now, in World War II, they funded everything. So there was money available for doing this, and Tesla was involved in it. He actually objected to them trying to do this because he said he hadn't done enough work on it yet, but it didn't matter. The Navy, being the Navy, said, too bad, we're going to go ahead. So they got hold of a destroyer escort. This is a picture of what a destroyer escort looks like. These would be typical of boats that would guard convoys of merchant ships that are carrying supplies or of different sorts across the ocean. And they would be the ones that the German U-boats would target because they're protecting the other boats. So this boat, this USS Eldridge, actually was in the Philadelphia Naval Yard in 1943. So what in the world happened? Well, they took this boat and they wrapped cables around it from one end to the other, bow to stern, on both sides of the boat, heavy-duty copper cables, many, many strands of copper wires. And this weighs a lot, by the way. And then they hooked it up to the electric generators on the ship, which could generate up to 5 megawatts of electricity. And Tesla had developed a controller that would control exactly how the electricity would get fed to these cables. So with that as a starting up, the Navy decided to load the ship up with sailors. I mean, it's a naval destroyer escort. Why shouldn't you have sailors on it? And of course, Tesla objected because there was a danger in this. He didn't know what would happen. And sure enough, what happened was that when they turned it on, the ship disappeared. It had a kind of a haze around it, and after a few minutes, it was gone. It was no longer there in the Philadelphia Naval Yard. However, 20 minutes before they turned it on, the ship appeared in Virginia at the Hampton Roads Naval Yard, which is a major facility, bigger than Philadelphia, near Norfolk. So 20 minutes before, it stayed there, disappeared in Philadelphia for half an hour to an hour. It's not clear, and then it reappeared, and they shut the power off. So this thing was invisible, but not only was it invisible, it moved in time because it went to Virginia 20 minutes earlier, and it also went in space. It went from Philadelphia to Virginia, to Norfolk. So this is really strange. What's worse is that there were many men on the ship, and a number of them actually went insane, or they were just disappeared, or some of them actually reappeared, but they were part of the plates of the metal plates that make up the doors and the rooms on the deck of the ship. They were just frozen in these things, and they had to go cut them out and amputate arms and legs and so forth. And this is clearly not something you want to have happen. So the net of it was that there's an interrelationship here between electromagnetism and time that Tesla was aware of, and he was able to, again, cloak the ship so that it really did disappear. But he was still early in figuring out what's going on. And after this disaster of having all these sailors damaged for life or dead, the Navy dropped it. So the main thing that we saw earlier was we saw that we could take the Maxwell's equations, and if we included the fluid mechanics of the ether of the space itself, then we ended up with a theory where electromagnetism generated or coupled with gravity, And the changes in gravity are due to the changes in the density of the ether. If you have a dense ether, there's a lot of gravity, there's a lot of matter there, and so forth. But time is a key component to all this, okay? And so this suggests that the Philadelphia experiment created a second divergent timeline for this destroyer escort when they turned on the generators, and then it coalesced back into our current timeline. And that was the end of it. That was the only time that was done. And here's a picture of what the controller probably looked like for this Philadelphia experiment. Nothing to write home about it, but it's a nice heavy duty box, and it exists. There's a lot of evidence that this Philadelphia experiment took place, but a lot of that has been suppressed by the U.S. Navy. They claim it never happened. So with that, we're now done. That is our exposition of time and the two aspects of time. Bruce, what in Buddhism is there? What is the notion of time in Buddhism? You're muted.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't study that part of Buddhism. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. We're fine.
Yeah. So I didn't study that part of Buddhism.
It never
And
came up.
what?
It never came up.
My teacher never talked about it, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think I know something very rudimentary that it's considered to be an illusion.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I tried to frame it as what is reality?
Right.
Or where's your consciousness? You're on multiple timelines.
Well, they don't talk about that sort of thing in Buddhism. What they do is they have a kind of a direct perception of understanding it that's very vivid. That's been my experience of it. Like
Well,
there's no free will in Buddhism.
So the view is that the Akashic Thread is what it is, and as you go through life and make these different decisions, you're following that. So a different way of saying it is that time, past, present, and future all exist at once. And I can sit here and hop forward in time or backwards in time, and I'll see what really happened.
Yeah, I haven't encountered anything like that in Buddhism. But there's more about understanding directly or remembering directly what happened in a previous life. That was fairly common, actually. If you meditate quite a bit, well, those sort of things just happen in meditation.
That's interesting. I think, see, this is a major failing in Western science, is that there's no meaningful, I mean, here you've had this physicist develop this many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And while all of these physicists you talk to say, yeah, I think that's what's really the best theory, none of them pursue it to say, well, what in the world does that mean? How do I, what what do I do now that I wouldn't do otherwise? And he gave some talks on his dissertation, and all of these physicists that were the leading physicists of the day dumped all over him so badly that he said, I'm going to leave physics, which he did. That was the last physics he ever did. I read his dissertation. He's right on the money. There's nothing wrong with it mathematically, but it's how you interpret the results. And that's what I see here. Is the problem is the interpretation of what you see going on. We use these words like timelines or many worlds, or they're all metaphors. What is really going on? I don't think any of these words really capture what's really going on, but I'm trying to use them to build a bridge that says, here's what I think is going on based on all of this other work that's been done. But who knows?
Well, in terms of awareness, there's many levels of awareness. When you go into deep meditation, you see almost different levels of reality. But the universe doesn't have any problem with it at all. It's just the nature of reality. I've experienced that quite a bit.
Well, the problem is, like, you have your reality. You're on your timeline. So now I'm on my timeline. Now we're interacting. So our two timelines are coupled together. We're not separate from one another. And then we'll end this, and you'll go your way and I'll go my way.
Well, that's one of my main experiences, is that everyone is in union.
Right.
Like it's a basically understanding when you transcend the self, you see as everything as being in union. If you think you have a self, that's when you think you're separate.
Right.
I remember you gave that thing on Einstein. He talked about the self.
Right.
Like he was bang on.
Yeah, no, more than likely there is no self, but we're all interconnected. So there's a little piece of the interconnectedness that I call me, but it reaches out to reach to you, interconnecting us.
Well, one of the things when you have this deeper level of awareness, everything is compassion. Compassion is reality. So there's kind of what I call a heart-mind contact that's everywhere. And most people aren't aware of that level of awareness, but that's actually where the union actually really is. It's it's a kind of a different mental understanding of reality that's actually more real than the
Right.
physics of reality. I mean, you think everything is physically what it is, but actually it's not that like that at all in terms of the deeper levels of the mind.
Right.
And that's fairly common understanding when you get into meditation.
Right. So this collective unconsciousness that links everything is the unification is this compassion.
Yeah, the reality of it is compassion. But also the reality of it is that there's no such thing as a self.
Yeah. See, none of these things are in physics.
No,
they're just totally absent. And then
right.
the notion that you can control them, which is what Ron was doing,
Right.
control these things, is also absent.
Yeah.
You read every physics book you want to, you'll never find anything that says, oh, you can control electromagnetism and gravity by, I can levitate, watch.
Right.
There's lots of examples of people that have levitated. So,
Yeah. Like it's yeah.
anyway. So I'm going to just leave. We spent enough time on time to show how little we know about time, or to put it differently, that words really don't do it. That you need
Yeah.
a higher level of understanding what you've been
Yeah.
the whole time. What do you want to say?
Well, I think I've already told you the story that I have telepathy, and I had a telepathic
Right.
dialogue with the Dalai Lama, and he told me that he could see all my past lifetimes and all my future lifetimes.
Right, right. Right. Which suggests it's more this notion of this Akashic thread that is the true representation, or the fabric that the whole thing is woven together.
Right.
Predetermined.
Yeah. And you can move around it. If you want to see a past life, you just go back in the thread. You want to see a future
Right.
life, you just, that's what the Dalai Lama
Yeah.
can do. Or Ron can do. Yeah.
Yeah. The part that's difficult to understand is
That place.
the compassion part. It changes everything. Like it's a different level of reality that moves everything.
Right.
And how vast it is. Because the compassion includes all living beings, animals, microbes, everything. So it's a
Right.
different understanding altogether, but it's very strong.
Right. And again, it's completely absent from physics.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
great. Okay. We will let you
Okay.
go. Thank you. Thank you. We'll cook up
Alrighty.
something next week.
Okay.
Have a
All right.
good.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.